Welcome. This is part 4 of the Airframe written test bank. A pilot reports that when the hydraulic pump is running, the pressure is normal. However, when the pump is stopped, no hydraulic pressure is available. This is an indication of a leaking accumulator air valve. If fluid is added to a constant pressure hydraulic system while the system is pressurized, what will result? The fluid level will increase when the system pressure is reduced. In a hydraulic system that has a reservoir pressurized with turbine engine compressor bleed air, which unit reduces the air pressure between the engine and reservoir? Air pressure regulator. What is the main purpose of a pressurized reservoir in a hydraulic system? Prevent hydraulic pump cavitation. One of the main advantages of SkyDraw is its wide operating temperature. Hydraulic fluid reservoirs are sometimes designed with a standpipe in one of the outlet ports in order to assure emergency supply of fluid. The outlet port with the standpipe in it furnishes fluid to the normal system power pump. An emergency supply of fluid is often retained in the main hydraulic system reservoir by the use of a standpipe. The supply line is connected to the inlet of the main hydraulic system. To check the air charge in a hydraulic accumulator, reduce all hydraulic pressure, then observe the reading on the accumulator air gauge. How would the air pressure charge in the accumulator be determined if the engine is inoperative but the system still has hydraulic pressure? Operate a hydraulic unit slowly and note the pressure at which a rapid pressure drop begins as it goes toward zero. How many of these seals are used with petroleum-based hydraulic fluids? Neoprene, Buna-N. Synthetic. Hydraulic system thermal relief valves are set to open at a higher pressure than the system relief valve. Chatter in a hydraulic system is caused by air in the system. If hydraulic fluid is released when the air valve core of the accumulator is depressed, it is evidence of a ruptured diaphragm or leaking seals. Although dents in the heel of a bend are not permissible, they are acceptable in the remainder of the hydraulic tube providing they are less than what percent of the tube diameter? 20%. If the hydraulic system pressure is normal while the engine-driven pump is running, but there is no pressure after the engine has been shut off, it indicates no air pressure in the accumulator. The purpose of restrictors in hydraulic systems is to control the rate of movement of hydraulically operated mechanisms. A common cause of slow actuation of hydraulic components is internal leakage of the actuating unit. A loud hammering noise in a hydraulic system having an accumulator usually indicates too low or no preload in the accumulator. Teflon hose that has developed a permanent set from being exposed to high pressure or temperature should not be straightened or bent further. In a typical high-pressure pneumatic system, if the moisture separator does not vent accumulated water when the compressor shuts down, a likely cause is malfunctioning solenoid dump valve. Which section of a turbine engine provides high pressure bleed air to an air cycle machine for pressurization and air conditioning? Low or high pressure compressor. At which component in an air cycle cooling system does air undergo a pressure and temperature drop? Expansion turbine. In a Freon vapor cycle cooling system, where is cooling air obtained for the condenser? Ambient air. What is ventilating air used for on a combustion heater? Carries heat to the places where needed. Turbine engine air used for air conditioning and pressurization is generally called bleed air. In the combustion heater combustion air system, what prevents too much air from entering the heaters as air pressure increases? Either a combustion air relief valve or a differential pressure regulator. How is the cabin pressure of an aircraft maintained in flight? By controlling the rate of air flowing out of the cabin. What controls the operation of the cabin pressure regulator? Cabin altitude. The basic air cycle cooling system consists of a source of compressed air, heat exchangers, and a turbine. The purpose of the dump valve in a pressurized aircraft is to relieve all positive pressure from the cabin. What component might possibly be damaged if liquid refrigerant is introduced into the low side of a vapor cycle cooling system when the pressure is too high or the outside air temperature is too low? Compressor. How can it be determined that a vapor cycle cooling system is charged with the proper amount of Freon? Air bubbles in the sight glass disappear. When charging a vapor cycle cooling system after evacuation, the low pressure gauge fails to come out of vacuum. What is indicated? Blockage in the system. What component in a vapor cycle cooling system would most likely be at fault if a system would not take a Freon charge? Expansion valve. Frost or ice buildup on a vapor cycle cooling system evaporator would most likely be caused by inadequate airflow through the evaporator. What test is used to determine the serviceability of an oxygen cylinder? Pressure test with water. Hydrostatic test. How often should standard weight high pressure oxygen cylinders be hydrostatically tested? Every 5 years. To be eligible for recharging, a DOT 3HT oxygen cylinder must have been hydrostatically tested every 3 years and be retired from service after 24 years or 4,380 filling cycles. Which oxygen system employs a regulator that operates only when the user inhales? Demand flow system. What type of oxygen system uses a rebreather bag type mask? Continuous flow. The component that determines the pressure level in the cabin is the cabin air pressure outflow valve. Hot compressor bleed air operates the conditioned air system on some turbine aircraft. The cold air is supplied by the air cycle air conditioning. For use in pressurized aircraft, which is generally the least complicated and requires the least maintenance. Chemical oxygen generator systems. What is the main cause of contamination in gaseous oxygen systems? Moisture. Where does the last stage of cooling in an air cycle conditioning system occur? Expansion tube. The point at which freon flowing through the vapor cycle cooling system gives up heat and changes from a gas to a liquid is the condenser. The point at which freon flowing through a vapor cycle cooling system absorbs heat and changes from a liquid to a gas is the evaporator. How is the cabin pressure of a pressurized aircraft usually controlled? By an automatic outflow valve that dumps all the pressure in excess of the amount for which it is set, which is considered a good practice concerning the inspection of heating and exhaust systems of aircraft utilizing a jacket around the engine exhaust as a heat source. Supplement physical inspections with periodic operational carbon monoxide detection tests. On some cabin pressurization systems, pressurization on the ground is restricted by the main landing gear operated switch. The cabin pressure control setting has a direct influence upon the outflow valve opening. The function of the evaporator in a freon cooling system is to lower the temperature of the cabin air. What is the purpose of a mixing valve in a compressor bleed air conditioning system? Control the supply of hot, cool, and cold air. What component of a pressurization system prevents the cabin altitude from becoming higher than the airplane altitude? Negative pressure relief valve. If the liquid level gauge in a vapor cycle cooling system indicates a low freon charge, the system should be operated for a period of time to reach a stable condition and then the freon level rechecked. If the cabin rate of climb is too great, the control should be adjusted to cause the outflow valve to close faster. The position of the thermostatic expansion valve in a vapor cycle cooling system is determined by freon in the outlet of the evaporator. The function of a condenser in a freon cooling system is to transfer heat from the freon gas to ambient air. The function of an expansion valve in a freon cooling system is to act as a metering device and to reduce the pressure of the liquid freon, which prevents a sudden loss of pressurization in the event that there is a loss of the pressurization source. Delivery air duct check valve. When servicing an air conditioning system that has lost all of its freon, it is necessary to check oil and add as necessary, evacuate the system, and add freon. The primary function of the cabin pressurization system outflow valve is to maintain the desired cabin pressure. One purpose of a jet pump in a pressurization and air conditioning system is to provide an augmentation of airflow in some areas of the aircraft. After cleaning or replacing the filtering element in a combustion heater fuel system, the system should be pressurized and all connections checked for leaks. The operation of an aircraft combustion heater is usually controlled by a thermostat switch which alternately turns the fuel on and off, a process known as cycling. The air cycle cooling system produces cold air by extracting heat energy across an expansion turbine. Referring to Figure 13, determine what unit is located immediately downstream of the expansion valve in a Freon refrigeration system. Evaporator coils. What does a steady stream of bubbles indicate when servicing a vapor cycle air conditioning system? The system is underly charged. An aircraft pressurization cycle is normally considered to be one complete series of events or operations that recur regularly. Which best describes cabin differential pressure? Difference between the ambient and internal air pressure. Composite oxygen bottles that conform to DOT E8162 have a service life of 15 years or 10,000 filling cycles, whichever occurs first. The cabin pressurization modes of operation are differential, unpressurized, and isobaric. Regarding the above statements, 1. Usually bleed air from a gas turbine engine compressor can be safely used for cabin pressurization. 2. Independent cabin conditioned air cycle machines can be powered by bleed air from an aircraft turbine engine compressor. Regarding those two statements, both number 1 and number 2 are true. A pressurization controller uses barometric pressure, cabin altitude, and cabin rate of change. What unit in a vapor cycle cooling system serves as a reservoir for the refrigerant? Receiver, dryer. What is the condition of the refrigerant as it enters the condenser of a vapor cycle cooling system? High pressure vapor. What is the condition of the refrigerant as it enters the evaporator of a vapor cycle cooling system? Low pressure liquid. The evacuation of a vapor cycle cooling system removes any water that may be present by lower the boiling point of the water and drawing out the vapor. What is the condition of the refrigerant as it leaves the evaporator for a vapor cycle cooling system? Low pressure vapor. What is the condition of the refrigerant as it leaves the condenser of a vapor cycle cooling system? High pressure liquid. In what position should the bottle be placed when adding liquid Freon to a vapor cycle cooling system? Vertical with the outlet at the bottom. When purging a Freon air conditioning system, it is important to release the charge at a slow rate. What is the reason for the slow rate discharge? Prevent excess loss of refrigerant oil. When a vapor cycle cooling system is not in operation, what is an indication that the system is leaking Freon? Oil seepage. When refrigerant is leaking from a vapor cycle system, what is the preferred method for finding the leak? Electronic leak detection. In an operating vapor cycle cooling system, if the last two lines connected to the expansion valve are essentially the same temperature, what does this indicate? The expansion valve is not metering Freon properly. The purpose of a subcooler in a vapor cycle cooling system is to cool the freon to prevent premature vaporization. A small amount of water in a vapor cycle cooling system can freeze in the expansion valve and stop the entire system operation. Regarding the above statements, 1. A small amount of water in a vapor cycle cooling system can freeze in the receiver dryer and stop the entire system operation. 2. Water in a vapor cycle cooling system will react with refrigerant to form hydrochloric acid, which is highly corrosive to the metal in the system. Regarding those above statements, only number 2 is true. When refrigerant R12 is placed over an open flame, it changes to phosgene gas. What type of oil is suitable for use in a vapor cycle cooling system? Special high-grade refrigeration oil. When an aircraft's oxygen system has developed a leak, the lines and fittings should be bubble tested with a special soap solution manufactured specifically for this purpose. If oxygen bottle pressure is allowed to drop below a specified minimum, it may cause moisture to collect in the bottle. What controls the amount of oxygen delivered to a mask in a continuous flow oxygen system? Calibrated orifice. When does the diluter demand regulator operate? When the user inhales. The primary difference between aviation breathing oxygen and other types of commercially available compressed oxygen is that aviation breathing oxygen has had all water vapor removed. What is used in some oxygen systems to change high cylinder pressure to low system pressure? Pressure reducer valve. In a high-pressure oxygen system, if the pressure reducer fails, what prevents high-pressure oxygen from entering the system downstream? Pressure relief valve. High-pressure cylinders containing oxygen for aviation use can be identified by their green color and the words "Aviators Breathing Oxygen" stenciled in 1-inch white letters. Referring to Figure 14, 1 hour after an oxygen system was charged for a leakage check, the oxygen pressure gauge read 460 psi at 63 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 hours later, the temperature was at 51 degrees Fahrenheit. A 5 psi change is the maximum allowable in a 6-hour period. What pressure gauge readings would be acceptable to remain within the allowable limits? 445 to 450 psi. An aircraft oxygen bottle may be considered airworthy if it has been hydrostatically tested and identified with the test date, DOT number, and serial number stamped on the cylinder near the neck. In a gaseous oxygen system, which of the following are invented to blow out plugs in the fuselage skin? Pressure relief valves. What is the purpose of pressurizing the aircraft cabin? To make human flight possible in the hostile environment of the upper atmosphere. Oxygen used in aircraft systems is at least 99.5% pure and is practically water-free. Oxygen systems in unpressurized aircraft are generally of the continuous flow and pressure demand types. The purpose of the airflow metering aneroid assembly found in oxygen diluted demand regulators is to regulate airflow in relation to cabin altitude when in diluted demand position. If a high-pressure oxygen cylinder is to be installed in an airplane, it must meet the specifications of the Department of Transportation. Before a high-pressure oxygen cylinder is serviced, it must be the correct type and have been hydrostatically tested within the proper time interval. A contaminated oxygen system is normally purged with oxygen. How should you determine the amount of oxygen in a portable, high-pressure cylinder? Read the pressure gauge mounted on the cylinder. What may be used as a lubricant on oxygen system tapered pipe thread connections? Teflon tape. On transport category aircraft, what might be an indication of an overpressure event of the aircraft oxygen system? The green thermal expansion disc missing. Which of the following are characteristic of a chemical or solid-state oxygen system? A volume storage capacity about 3 times that of compressed oxygen, and the system generators are inert below 400 degrees Fahrenheit, even under severe impact. An aircraft magnetic compass is swung to update the compass correction card when equipment is added that correct compass deviation. Which of the following operation mechanisms would be found in a hydraulic pressure gauge? Bourdon tube. What is the fixed line mark attached to the compass bowl of a magnetic compass? Lubber line. Regarding the above statements, aircraft instruments are color-coded to direct attention to operational ranges and limitations. 2. Aircraft instruments range markings are not specified by Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations but are standardized by aircraft manufacturers. Regarding the above statements, only number 1 is true. Which of the following will cause inaccuracies in a magnetic compass that has been compensated for by an aircraft mechanic? Deviation. What will be the result if the instrument static pressure line becomes disconnected inside a pressurized cabin during cruising flight? The altimeter and airspeed indicator will both read low. The maximum deviation during level flight permitted in a compensated magnetic direction indicator installed on an aircraft certified under 14 CFR FAR Part 23 is 10 degrees. Magnetic compass bowls are filled with a liquid to dampen the oscillation of the float. Instrument static system leakage can be detected by observing the rate of change, an indication of the altimeter after suction has been applied to the static system to cause a prescribed equivalent altitude to be indicated. The maximum altitude loss permitted during an unpressurized aircraft instrument static pressure system integrity check is 100 feet in 1 minute. Which statement regarding an aircraft instrument vacuum system is true? Dry-type vacuum pumps with carbon vanes are very susceptible to damage from solid airborne particles and must take in only filtered air. When an aircraft altimeter is set to 29.92 inches of mercury on the ground, the altimeter will read pressure altitude. Which of the following instrument discrepancies could be corrected by an aviation mechanic? Red line missing, mounting screws loose, case paint chipped, leakage at B nut. Which of the following instrument discrepancies would require replacement of the instrument? Case leaking, glass cracked, instrument will not zero out, or fogged. Which of the following instrument conditions is acceptable and would not require correction? Case paint chipped. A barometric altimeter indicates pressure altitude when the barometric scale is set at 29.92 inches of mercury. At sea level, when the average atmosphere pressure is 14.7 psi, the barometric pressure is 29.92 inches of mercury. A bourdon tube instrument may be used to indicate pressure and temperature. A turn coordinator instrument indicates both roll and yaw. Aircraft temperature thermocouple leads may not be altered and are designed for a specific installation. A synchro transmitter is connected to a synchro receiver electronically with wires. The operation of an angle attack indicating system is based on detection or differential pressures at a point where the airstream flows in a direction not parallel to the true angle of attack of the aircraft. Turbine engines' exhaust gas temperatures are measured by using chrome aluminum thermocouples. Fluid flow transmitters are designed to transmit data electrically. Which of the following causes of aircraft magnetic compass inaccuracies may be compensated for by mechanics? Deviation. Who is authorized to repair an aircraft instrument? A certified repair station approved for that class instrument. A certified mechanic with at least an airframe rating may perform inspections and function checks on aircraft instruments. What does a reciprocating engine manifold pressure gauge indicate when the engine is not operating? The existing atmospheric pressure. The requirements for testing and inspection of the instrument static systems required by FAR 14 CFR Section 91.411 are contained in Part 93, Appendix E, FAR/CFR. Which condition would most likely be to cause excessive vacuum in a vacuum system? Vacuum relief valve and improperly adjusted. Data transmitted between components in an EFIS are converted into digital signals. The function of a CRT cathode ray tube is an EFIS is to display alphanumeric data and representations of aircraft instruments. The function of a simple generator SG in an EFIS is to receive and process input signals from aircraft engine sensors and send that data to the appropriate display. The function of a display controller in an EFIS is to allow the pilot to see the appropriate system configuration for the current flight situation. A radar altimeter determines altitude by transmitting a signal and receiving back a reflected signal. A radar altimeter indicates altitude above ground level. Resistance type temperature indicators when using a Wheatstone bridge or radiometer circuits may be used to indicate the temperatures of which of the following: free air, carburetor air, coolant, and oil temperature. When flags such as NAV, NAV, HDG, or GS are displayed on an HSI, the indication is that function is inoperative. Instrument panel shock mounts absorb low frequency, high amplitude shocks. What determines the number of shock mounts that are needed to be installed on an instrument panel? Weight of the complete panel. Which procedure should you use if you find a vacuum-operated instrument glass loose? Install another instrument. Which airport approach uses a radar altimeter? Instrument. Which instruments are connected to an aircraft's pitot system? Vertical speed indicator, altimeter, and airspeed indicator. Which of the following instruments will normally have range markings? Cylinder head temperature gauge and airspeed indicator. How would an airspeed indicator be marked to show the best rate of climb speed, one engine being inoperative? A blue radial line. The green arc on an aircraft temperature gauge indicates the desirable temperature range. What must be done to an instrument panel that is supported by shock mounts? Bonding straps must be installed across the instrument mounts as a current path. What marking color is used to indicate a cover glass has slipped? White. Aircraft instruments should be marked and graduated in accordance with the specific aircraft maintenance or flight manual. Aircraft instrument panels are generally shock mounted to absorb low frequency, high amplitude shocks. The method of mounting aircraft instruments in their respective panels depends on the Design of the instrument case. How is a flangeless instrument case mounted to an instrument panel? By an expanding type clamp secured to the back of the panel and tightened by a screw from the front of the instrument panel. Cases for electrically operated instruments are made of iron or steel cases. When installing an instrument in an aircraft, who is responsible for making sure it is properly marked? The mechanic installing the instrument. Where may a person look for the information necessary to determine the required markings on an engine instrument? Aircraft Flight Manual or Aircraft Maintenance Manual. A certified mechanic with airframe and power plant ratings may not perform repairs to aircraft instruments. The red radial lines on the face of an engine oil pressure gauge indicates minimum and or maximum safe operating limits. A certified mechanic may perform 100-hour inspections of instruments. An aircraft instrument panel is electrically bonded to the aircraft structure to provide current return paths. How many of the following are controlled by gyroscopes? 1. Attitude indicator. 2. Heading indicator. 3. Turn needle of the turn and slip indicator. 3. The lubber line on a directional gyro is used to represent the nose of the aircraft. Which instruments are connected to an aircraft static pressure system only? Vertical speed indicator and altimeter. When an unpressurized aircraft's static pressure system is leak checked to comply with the requirements of FAR 14 CFR Section 91.411, what aircraft instrument may be used in lieu of a pedostatic system tester? Altimeter. If a static pressure system checks reveal excessive leakage, the leaks may be located by isolating portions of the line and testing each portion systematically, starting at the instrument connections. When performing the static system leakage check required by FAR 14 CFR Section 91.411, the technician utilizes negative pressure. What is the primary purpose of an autopilot? To relieve the pilot of control of the aircraft during long periods of flight. Which of the following provides manual maneuverability of the aircraft while the autopilot is engaged? Flight controller. In an autopilot, which signal nullifies the input signal to the ailerons? Follow-up signal. In which control element